on the Rec Yard every Wednesday night. Tunchi, nice to see you, Tooch. My name is Marcy Marie.
I'm Tunchi.
And we are discombobulated because it's not Wednesday night.
It's not.
We are doing a little pre-recording. We have other plans tomorrow night. Actually, we have tickets to go see Angela Davis.
Angela Davis, that's right.
So that's going to be incredible. So a couple of things going on. The first thing is last week we talked about we were going to be talking about some prison slang and kind of have a lighthearted video, but some things came up like life does.
Yes.
And Toonch, tell them what's going on.
Oh my God. So again, we're going to be discussing things that are related to the lockdown, the statewide lockdown in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. It's a hot topic, rightfully so, and which will include some stuff that we're hearing, but we are going to try to focus mainly on the food because we know that, when COVID happened, they promised they were going to change the way they do stuff. And of course, they did not. So
that's right. But before we get to talking about the food conditions in the Texas prison system, hey, Tunchi, let's do a weekly. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. Why are things not working tonight? I hit the button. It should have just played.
Honey, I don't know.
We need a producer. So we're not quite big enough for a producer, but I'm underqualified for this position. But
what people don't know is that before we started just now, we had started and I said, honey, turn it off.
Yes. Yeah, this is a do-over. This is a do-over, but we're not going back. So I'm not going to hit that button again. That is a really cute intro into our weekly recap, but I'm not even going to try again, even though I recorded my voice sounding as cute as possible to do that. So what we do want to talk about is some things did happen this week, actually, that aren't necessarily have to do with the lockdown. We had some things. Toonch, you got to be a part of a big panel discussion. Tell us about that.
I did.
You did. Do you remember with TABP?
Oh my God.
In San Marcos at the university? I saw pictures all over social media. You were there.
It was my doppelganger. Yes, I'm so sorry. I always freeze because I think people don't understand just how busy we are and how many different things that we're doing all at once. So I'm like, remind me again of literally something I might have done yesterday. But yes, of course, we had a really great panel at a conference. It was the Texas Oral History Conference in San Marcos. I was there with the Texas After Violence Project, which Marcy is a Vision After Violence fellow. She will be showing her project in October. I hope people can make it, and we'll release more details for the event. And what it is it's an archive. We document state-sanctioned violence. We have a physical archive of items, but we collect oral histories. And this is very different than a journalist doing an interview or even our social media interviews. This is just really kind of holding space for someone to tell a very intense story about their experience with state-sanctioned violence, whether it's incarceration, police brutality, or other ways that the state harms us. So we were on a panel explaining what our archive is and how we activate it for advocacy. And so, yeah, it was really cool hanging out with everybody and very different audience, Marcy. One of the first questions we had was, so how do you feel about defunding the police? And it's like, did you hear anything that we said about how we document consent so thoughtfully? And that's the first. So it was interesting, but we did have some great social justice advocates there as well.
That TAVP group is incredible. And so, listen, I want to also talk about some things that happened on my end this week, but we have a very special guest, and I want to honor her time because she doesn't have much time with us tonight. But we have the Carrie Blakinger. She has agreed to come on because she has the inside scoop,
She
the
does.
dirty, low down dirt on what they are feeding inside the Texas prisons right now. So let's have her hop on. Carrie, thanks so much.
Hey, sorry, I'm obviously doing this on my phone, which is why it's vertical and fucked up lighting.
Yeah, that's okay. It's no problem at all. I literally texted Carrie just moments before we hopped on here, so we are not expecting you. We're happy exactly how you are for sure. So, Carrie, you tell us just briefly about your background in reporting for the Texas prison system, and then maybe what you do now.
Yeah, so I did time first, obviously. That's why I'm here talking with you lovely ladies. Um, and I did my time in New York on a drug charge, and when I got out, I became a reporter. I worked at a few papers in New York and then went to Houston and worked for the Houston Chronicle for a few years, covering TDC and criminal justice generally. And then after Houston, I went to, well, I guess I just kind of stayed in Texas, but I started working at the Marshall Project and kept covering Texas prisons from there. And now I'm at the LA Times and covering mostly the sheriff's department here. Their jails are, I think, worse than Texas prisons, which is really saying something. But I still keep in touch with a lot of folks in Texas and in Texas prisons. So I've been posting some about the lockdowns.
And we appreciate that because we know that you have moved on to better career opportunities, but we also know that you still have a heart for the incarcerated folks here in our state. And we appreciate you so much. We did feel like we were losing one of our champions when you got your new position. And just very quickly, I want to brag on Carrie because she had an article that was covering the death row guys and some things that they use to pass their time. And it got published not only in the LA Times, but the same day in the New York Times. And we were just so proud and impressed with that, Carrie.
It was very cool to see that in print. That was a lot of years of reporting.
It's it was a long way.
Okay.
I remember the long discussions about the Dungeons and Dragons and
Oh my
just
God.
working on that. Yeah.
Girl, you should have seen this fact check process, okay? This was the most unhinged fact check process that I have ever had. So magazines do like a whole different fact check process. Like newspaper reporting, your fact check process is your editor asks, like, are you sure? Like there's just, like that's basically it. There's just a few questions they'll ask. Fact check process for a magazine article, that you have to annotate every single word that is said, like provide a source for like every single word. And so I did that, but then they have a phone call to work through it. Like they want to talk through any questions that the fact checkers have. And when they wanted to schedule that phone call was when there was a hurricane and I was covering the hurricane, but I was already in Mexico doing some of my drug reporting. So I was in Tijuana. And then there's a hurricane coming to Tijuana. And they're like, no, we need this fact check call on Monday morning. So I'm literally walking through, like we hired a driver to like, who had a van and could take us around and stuff. And I literally had to be like walking through the like mud in the slums of Tijuana, looking at mudslides when the New York Times decides that's the moment that we need to do this fact check call. And they're being like, well, do we say figurines or miniatures? Are we sure? And I'm like literally like looking at the slums at that moment. And I'm just like, I'm going to lose reception. Like, can't we just something? So I was like, I am never going to forget this moment. This is a weird situation.
That's really incredible. And you're kind of living a life that I can't imagine you dreamed of when you were locked up? Like, I can't imagine being locked up and picturing where you're at now.
So, okay, I've been thinking about this a lot also because when that story came out, a bunch of like film producers were interested in optioning it. And when you publish a long form narrative, like that happens sometimes. And I've had two of my other stories got optioned, so like they basically pay a little bit of money and then sort of put it on reserve, like a given production company's basically like putting it on reserve, so no one else can make it, but they don't necessarily make it. So neither of those got made. They just, got optioned and not made. And this time we've had, I don't know, probably 10 or 11 production companies interested in optioning it, which, I would think bodes well. Obviously, there's a writer's strike going on, so nothing can really be made right now, but people can do creative work up to the point of writing, basically. But one of them was a production company that the director made one of his, he's a well-known director, and one of his movies was relating to drugs. And it's one I used to watch when I was like, the first time I watched it came out and I was still getting high. And to be like on a call with like his production company and him like wanting to, make something out of a story I wrote, I was like, that is like a real 180 moment.
It's like
I love that.
just
And I could,
unreal, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. It wasn't that long ago that you were writing in code in your journal in prison in New York, I mean, that's
multiple people felt the need to let me know that they thought I was autistic when I posted a video about that. I'm like, just because I wrote in code doesn't mean I'm like autistic. Like, I mean, I could be, but you don't have enough data to say that from.
Right.
Like, I showed you a single piece of paper in a TikTok, and you're diagnosing me with autism. Like, people are fucking wild.
well, and not everybody realizes how crucial it is to have something of your own in there. And when we write our thoughts down on paper in prison, they are no longer our own. They are for
Right.
everyone.
Well,
So
it becomes evidence, right? It becomes evidence.
exactly. Well, Carrie, we know that you don't have much time, but we definitely are talking about the Texas prison statewide lockdown. So it was really interesting that about a week ago, before the lockdown, days before the lockdown, I posted a video with your article in the Marshall Project that I think got published at the beginning of this year, or not. It was a more recent article, and it was talking about the conditions of the food that they were serving during the COVID lockdown. And Jen, if you have that, I wonder, should we pull it up? Do you have some of those pictures?
Yeah, I do. Let me see. So let's go with we'll go with this one, right? Because this was the big bombshell. This was the big bombshell during COVID.
Right.
Yeah. So, Carrie, tell us about this article when you wrote this I remember you called me. I was sitting at a Dairy Queen. I was getting a snack, and you said, dude, is this real? Does this really happen? And I was like, yeah. So can you tell us like just how this article came about when the COVID lockdowns happened?
Yeah. So, I think at that point I'd been in touch with some people with contraband phones for a little while, and I just couldn't figure out how to make use of any of it in a story. Like they were sending me horrible shit, and in some cases, like guards doing and saying horrible things, or just, crazy fights, people overdosing. And I was like, I can't use any of this, like, without identifying the unit and people's identities. And then they started sending me pictures of the food. Even, I think, maybe even before COVID hit. No, I guess it wasn't until after COVID hit. Right after COVID hit, people started sending me pictures of the food. And I was like, oh shit, this is a thing I can actually use and not identify someone. And as the food got worse, they kept sending me more. So, so I wrote about it, and I actually found a lot of kind of interesting stuff in the course of that story, because I also didn't, I mean, you guys would know this because you would have been there then. But like, I didn't know that the food, they used to pay for more things with the food budget. Like they used to have, I don't know, real milk or liquid milk and like hamburger buns. So it wouldn't have been bread and hot dogs like in that first picture. I guess there was some point in TDC history prior to 2011 where it would have been a hot dog bun in theory.
Right.
So I didn't realize that they had cut into the food budget once before during a tough budget cycle, and then just never increased in step with the population at all, or to take account for like inflation or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of other interesting stuff that I covered that I uncovered in the course of that. But I mean, the main thing was I got a bunch of fucking shitty pictures of food that doesn't look like you would, maybe you would feed it to your dog, but some of it I wouldn't feed to a dog. I'd be worried the dog would shit itself.
It's bad, right? It's bad. And I remember just the kind of public response to this article was pretty shocking. Like, I never thought that people really would care, and they did. I mean, from the things that I saw and read, I think people were shocked that this is how bad our food was.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I can't figure out the pattern to what people will care about, like, and what they'll just be like, oh, they deserve it. Because when I tweet Texas prison food, or I do stories or videos about Texas prison food, like, generally people are kind of like, that's terrible. But if I tweet anything from Alabama, I just get overwhelmed with comments of people saying that they deserve it. And it's so interesting to me because, like, the only time I've had to lock my Twitter was when I was tweeting videos of Alabama prison food during the strike. So that was an inmate worker strike. And I was tweeting pictures of the food during that. And I got more nasty comments than I've gotten for literally anything ever, to the point that I was like, I have to set my Twitter private. And I did for like a week. And even videos, when I do videos, like some of those will be just real shitty comments. But for Alabama specifically, I don't really know why, because I mean, my followers are the same people either way. I guess they just really hate Alabamans.
That's crazy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's so weird.
Because it's Alabama, it keeps going viral in a different, like, in a demographic, or like, that I don't normally deal with. It's just very odd, because I wouldn't expect like people following Alabama prisons politics to be so much different than those following Texas. The other thing that I got a lot of shitty comments on, which will not surprise you, was when I posted a video of somebody with a jar of peanut butter that had just liquefied in the sun, and not in the sun, sorry, in their cell, in their dark cell. And I got so many shitty comments on that one. It's so wild. Although I will say the shitty comments on heat related stuff are almost never Texans. Even like the people that'll tend to be like, fuck prisoners. If you post something about prison heat in Texas in July, I think most people in Texas understand. Like, nobody's sitting around wishing that people should be out in that. I just don't think people can fathom it in the Northeast. I don't think they really understand how hot that is. I mean, some people do, but I do notice that the shitty comments I get are typically not actual Southerners. Do you guys notice that when you post about it?
I've never even thought to look at it. I've never even thought to investigate that far. Like, I mean, I do. I get both. I get the, oh my gosh, nobody should have to do that, and in an equal amount, I get the, well, don't do the crime if you can't do the time, that kind of stuff, or they get what they deserve. It's all about choices. Right. And I thought, well, often I just write back, or it's about,
my God,
overcriminalization and mass incarceration and poverty and substance abuse disorders and mental health illnesses.
I have a video about this I was going to post because I was thinking about this. So people always say, like, when they say this kind of shitty stuff specifically about air, and that one of the things they'll also say is like, people didn't never used to have air, blah blah blah. But or they'll say, prisons didn't used to have air. But I was thinking, this is actually like really different than, when we compare it to any other time, because the prison population is now on more mental health meds that can raise your body temperature than they would have been before. You have more people that are mentally ill, which even certain unmedicated mental illnesses can also make you more heat vulnerable. And it's more old people than it's ever been. And
Right.
the last time that air conditioning was not common, prior to the 60s, like when it was not common in like the rest of the, in the free world outside of prison, at that point, like the prison population would have been so much smaller. When air conditioning was not common, the prison population was about 1/10 of what it is now, and almost nobody was serving these crazy long sentences that later became common. So like, it's also just not even comparable to like pre-air conditioned times. And I never really had thought about that before.
Mm-hmm. Well, going back to the food article, and everybody seemingly having a really good response to it, right? Like it did get TDCJ's attention. Well, and also I feel like it got their attention in a very strong way towards you, with being very angry that you were getting all this
Yeah,
cell phone footage and pictures. And
remember
I'm
that?
sorry, what? Yeah, oh yeah, when they threatened to
Yeah.
prosecute you and arrest you, and yeah, it's crazy. And so, I think me and Marcy tell people that it's like, you think that TDCJ is not watching, but certainly we know for sure that they are, and they hear that and they do bend to some type of pressure. I think they get their almost like they're overly sensitive, which they should be, and they kind of act like they get their feelings hurt when, like, almost in this weird way that you would not expect a state agency to kind of respond to
Well,
social media.
very specific to who their prior spokesman was.
Well, right.
I don't find them. They're not combative on social media now. Remember, oh God, I forget what he did, but at one point, the prior spokesman, who I shall not name, I forget what he did. He started fighting with someone on Twitter from the TDCJ account.
God.
And like had to stop using their Twitter account. I forget what he was fighting about them with, but I was just like, this is wild and unhinged.
Yeah, well, I think that
would have been funny.
That certainly then it was more of like combative, but I think now it's kind of more a positive, but it is always a response. Like it is directly in relation to whatever advocates are saying, or the media is saying. Like, yeah. It's pretty it's reactive. It's very reactive. And so what your article did was really inspire a lot of change. And I want to share the follow-up article that you did here, where TDCJ, boy, they promised to do some different things. So can you explain just a little bit about the article, as they move into investigating and the changes that they said that they were going to do to improve the food?
Well, I mean, I think most of what they said in that, like they said that they were going to make a variety of changes, including changes that would make it so that people weren't getting served, cold Johnnies. But they did say that was part of like the 2030 plan. So I mean, in fairness, not surprised that that has not taken effect in time to, for this particular lockdown. But it was at that point also a pretty vague plan, because there was other pieces of that plan that were interesting. Like they had plans for expanding access to dentures, and they didn't have any specific sort of, I don't know, actual action plan as to how that was going to happen. So I don't know. It would be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Well, what were some of the changes that we did see back then? And Marcy, you can talk too about, like, you were still there during that time. Did they start serving food differently to y'all?
I was there during that time, and we had a few Johnny Sacks where I was living on the Dr. Lane Murray unit. We were completely locked down for months on end on that unit. I was in a dorm that held 102 people, cubicle style housing. And the way they would do chow is they would bring the chow in those big laundry carts, and you would line up row by row. So you would walk out, go get your food, and come back. Well, we had one meal, the first row that went out, they're opening up and they are just getting back in line and making a big line and taking it right back, and we dropping them at the door. So they're just, I mean, it was just that bad. So that happened about 3 meals in a row. The food was terrible. We were hungry. There was no more commissary. Everybody's out of commissary. Nobody's going to store. And the food was very much like these pictures. And like I've told people, I've done all of it. I have opened up that piece of bread with the runny peanut butter mixture on it and taken a bite as much to get as much of that protein, just because I knew my body needed that to survive. So I'm on that side of things when these articles are coming out and the contraband phone pictures are coming out and Carrie's doing her thing. And so we do start seeing changes all of a sudden. Now we start seeing, they start giving us chike pouches with our meal once a week, which is like a protein shake that's sold on commissary. They would start supplementing some of our Johnny Sacks with commissary food from the store, which was really interesting to us. And we did notice that all of a sudden a peanut butter and jelly sandwich actually looked like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It didn't look like just something crazy like what we see. We weren't getting frozen food anymore. Prior to that, we were getting chicken patties that weren't cooked through. We were getting burritos that the middle where the beans would still have a line of that frozen bean in it. And that's what we were dealing with prior to that. So we definitely saw a change. Those of us on the inside didn't know about kind of the movement that was happening out here. We didn't know what was happening. We just know it was horrible. So yeah.
Yeah.
I remember after one of those stories came out, I started, like, people started sending around pictures of, like, vegetables and things. Some of the units at least briefly got vegetables, and a banana here and there. But yeah, I then of course started hearing that it had gone pretty much back to normal, and then the freeze happened in 2021, and I wrote about it again. And then my last story, which we talked about before, they said they were going to do something.
I do remember during that COVID, now that you said about vegetables, I do remember that during COVID or during that, when they started changing things up, that's another thing they would do is bring in supplemental items like in cups that were steamed vegetables. I mean, it was really very much different than we were getting.
I have to go because I just got a statement from the sheriff's department and I need to put it in the story that I wrote today. So, yeah, I'm going to get going. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I got like 3 hours of sleep. So
we understand. Carrie, it was such a pleasure having you. And thank you for making the time to come talk with us. And thank you for all the work that you do for incarcerated people. And we will see you soon.
All right. I'll see you.
Bye. Well, I mean, as Carrie pops off, maybe we should, this kind of leads us into, so I'm trying to show where we are now, right? Like, so it was bad. We know that the food has always been bad during lockdowns. Not good on a good day, quite frankly. There were changes, like Carrie said, that the budget had changed around 2011, 2012, when they took away dinner for state jail people who were incarcerated in state jails. On the weekend, they only received 2 meals. I remember, I'm sure you remember it, Henley. You better eat up because that's the only meal you're getting today. So we already know that
I was in Plain State Jail when that new policy went into
God,
effect. I was
gee.
there, and those women were crazy out of their mind
I
with that.
imagine.
They were out of control, and I just can't it really shocks me that some of the men's units that it went down that way, because as mad and crazy as the women got, I just can only imagine the men were even more.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're getting told that you're not, well, we're going to cut out one of your meals. I mean, my God, like it was just shocking to us. And it was around the time we no longer got real milk. They took bread. They really whittled down that food budget, right? Let's not cut out the other stuff. Let's start cutting food. And you saw that during the lockdowns. It made the food worse. They promised to do some things different, and they had people going out to the units during COVID taking pictures. Oh, look, we're doing hot meals and cups, and we've got a plan, the 2030 plan, which is, TDCJ says all the time, the 2030 plan. Well, I'm real curious to see what happens, in 7 years, how far we've gotten. But so now we're here with the big statewide lockdown. So let's show everyone the cell phone footage from Carrie's TikTok that was leaked to her of what the food is looking like. Okay, so we'll see if things have changed or, like Carrie said, gone back to the way they were.
Yes, let's look at that, and before I click on that button, I'll just say that 2030 is going to come, and in 2030, we will be here watching.
All right, here we go.
Some leaked video from inside Texas prisons, which are on lockdown right now because there have been 16 killings there this year. More than twice the annual average over the past decade, and the year's not even over. I'm Carrie and I'm a reporter, and here's the data for the past few years. The only reason that we know that it's 16 this year is that prison officials admitted it when they put the system on lockdown a few days ago. Because they claim that a lot of these deaths are drug related, they're not even letting guards bring water to work. Prisoners can't have visits, and they're mostly being locked in their cells and bunks all the time. In Texas, lockdown also means getting these horrible starvation level brown bag meals called Johnnies. I've done some videos and stories about them before, but here's some video that someone sent me about what they look like this time around.
This is the breakfast one. This is oatmeal. It's got sugar in it, brown sugar inside, which is incredibly awesome, but just, well, it's not much oatmeal. With peanut butter.
And that oatmeal's uncooked.
Right.
And then we've got lunch. This is
Just bread.
2 slices of dry bread. Now there's your main course. Again,
What is that?
Peanut butter sandwich. It's awesome.
That's the peanut butter and jelly sandwich with this dime size, quarter size wet spot on the bread.
I mean, I can taste it.
And this is several meals.
Oatmeal.
He's showing
I
several.
have some leaked video from inside.
Yeah. So it's obvious, right, that nothing changed. And this is, it's something, Marcy, that, we often tell legislators, right? Like, well, the state agency will say, we don't have to do this in law. We can do it in policy. But when we codify things under statute, when we get it in law, right, like that mandates that things happen, and they really have to be accountable for that. And we also talk a lot about a trust. And if you repeatedly show that we can't trust your word, why would you expect us to not continue to advocate the way that we do?
I have I have so many comments across my social media from families that are hearing from their loved ones inside. We're hearing from loved ones, our Lioness loved ones, ladies inside writing Lioness and telling us, but I thought I'd read a couple. Should I?
Please do.
Yeah. So, and I have messages on my social media from incarcerated folks too that say they're incarcerated. I don't know, but it's just random messages. It's like, hey, I'm locked up, and this is what we got. That's what one of these is. It says, I'm an ADSEG. The food is watered down. The lockdown sacks only serve wet bologna. Do you remember that wet bologna?
I can't. I felt it in my throat, girl. Like,
It and what happens is those are like frozen. So
right.
they put them on the piece of bread while they're still frozen. And then they do whatever for the hours it takes to get delivered. And by the time it gets to you, the bread is glued on to the wet bologna. And
Ugh.
it's the worst ever. My husband is in Garza West. The food situation is the same. They're feeding him spoiled meat, peanut butter, and sandwiches. Connolly unit is not feeding meals until 10 o'clock at night sometimes. Mine's in Seg too. They fed him spoiled meat the other day. Little food during this lockdown. My husband says he's hungry all the time. Gibbs hasn't gotten a sack lunch all day and no breakfast as of 5 p.m. As they only got fed at noon, which was their breakfast, Johnny Sack. And by
Jesus.
10 p.m., when the phone calls ended, he still had not gotten lunch or dinner. My son just called me from Telford. He is starving. They're not eating. He said, this mom says, oh my God, I'm so scared for my son. One, and I can't, I just, they're just on and on. This is, you see, they're just on and on and on and on. And one lady, she said, my husband wrote me and said, if I don't survive this lockdown, please know that I loved you and I fought to survive. Like that's a pretty serious message to send your loved ones. And it takes a little something. Oftentimes we hear like, oh, incarcerated people, you can't trust what they're saying. They exaggerate. But actually, when we're talking to our families from the inside of a prison, it's less. We are watering it down because we know that you're already worried about us. My family didn't even know the prisons weren't air conditioning until I had been there for 7 years because y'all are already worried. So honestly, if these are the messages that they're getting, it's a dire situation.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. You know, if this is what they're hearing, it's probably 10 times worse than that. I see your cloud back there it's your rainbow cloud is starting to it's getting
My
sad.
I am, I have a traveling studio because I live out in the middle of the sticks with my Wi-Fi won't even let me stream. So I have my traveling studio, and tonight I am in my daughter's new esthetician suite. She has got it looking so adorable in here. Her first client is tomorrow. So I will have to fix this cloud before I leave. But she told me that was really hard for them to get up. Her and her friend came. So that's what's going on behind me. Don't let it distract you. I was just going to roll with it, but you pointed it out. So
I'm sorry. Because I'm easily distracted. But yeah, I mean, the stuff that we're hearing, I told y'all yesterday that, the ladies from Riverside were like, girl, they are giving us peanut butter sandwich. We kept opening it. She said, we open it as just a blob, right? And she said, Jennifer, that was all we got for lunch and dinner and breakfast, right? Was the peanut butter sandwich with an egg that when they opened it, it was soft boil. She goes, but aren't soft boil eggs at least supposed to be gummy? They're not supposed to run. I said, they're not supposed to run. They're raw if they're running yolk. But she was like, we opened these up and they tasted weird, and not the eggs, the sandwiches. She goes, and they taste weird and they look funny, but it's kind of pinkish. And we were like, what the hell? So they had one of the officers that used to work in the kitchen go down to the chow hall and figure out girl, they had run out of syrup. Then they ran out of jelly, they ran out of syrup, and then and they've got to stretch it. So they were stretching it with the Kool-Aid.
Powdered Kool-Aid.
With powdered Kool-Aid. And then today she told me, girl, they're out of peanut butter. She says, we are so hungry. And I remember that, when we had lockdowns, our shakedown lockdowns, our biannual lockdowns way back in the day, when I was a kid, it wasn't no rolling lockdowns. It was like this lockdown. You didn't leave your cubicle, and all you had was that Johnny for 3 weeks. Crane was on lockdown for 3 weeks because it has satellites. And but that was back in the day, Marcy, when we got a carton of milk, we got cereal, 2 eggs, a sandwich, and then like the bologna or the beef sandwich. And now you're doing good to get that crusty, dried up blob of peanut butter and, a turnip. I remember one picture Carrie showed me that they put a turnip in the bag, a dirty turnip with a peanut butter sandwich. And it's like, a turnip, a dirty turnip. And that was their vegetable. Like y'all were getting steamed vegetable in cups. Some of the guys were just getting, when the tractor comes with all the produce that's been dug out of the garden, which usually, by the way, is rotten because it's what's left over after selling everything. And they were just they were just throwing that. Oh, they want vegetables. And they were just throwing these rotten potatoes and turnips in these bags. And, again, society is judged by the way it treats its poor, it's incarcerated, the most vulnerable. And it's sad, Marcy. They're hungry. That's real. That hunger is real.
It's terribly sad. And I remember being hungry like that, Tunch. And I had family support. I had financial support from the outside, not as much as a lot, but I went to store almost every time they called store, and I might have not spent the whole amount, but I had groceries in my box all the time, and I was hungry. I can't imagine how much worse it was for the ladies that didn't have any food in their box.
When I first got to prison, my family didn't understand that I had to have money on my books, like for food. And I was younger. Okay. So I was like 18, 19, and my metabolism was super high, and we were out in the fields all day, and I didn't have money to go to the store. I got like $20 a month. And that was for my stamps, writing supply, my hygiene stuff, and maybe a treat. You know what I mean? Like a rainbow pop and a Sprite. That's what I would treat myself to, because I had no money left over for food, much less appliances. I barely bought a fan one time. And I would come in from those fields so hungry. And that was just regular chow, not during lockdown and stuff. And I remember laying in my bed at night, and I remember crying one time. And that was one of my worst years incarcerated. And I just was crying because I was so hungry, because you leave the chow hall hungry.
Oh,
period.
Gosh. There was a time that I had gone to medium custody. It was one of the times I had been in trouble for something. Actually, I was in trouble for almost nothing. I went to medium custody for an out of place case. I was walking down the aisle, and my friend called out to me, Laquita Davis, shout out Laquita. She called out to me, and I stopped, and she was asking me about college, if they had called us for college. And an officer that did not like me, was working in Central. I was on camera. Boy. That officer called my pod boss, and my pod boss wrote me up for that. So yeah, that's anyways, I went to medium custody. The whole point of that is I went to medium custody, and my friend Cher Marie, my best friend, she was down there, and we were hungry, girl. We were on commissary restriction, and we were eating chow hall food, but we were still hungry. We were those girls at the table at chow that were like, hey, are you going to eat that? Hey, like we're looking at people's trays. You're not going to eat that? Yeah, I want it. Bring it here. Because sometimes people would go to chow and just kind of nibble because they had commissary in their box. And I remember being hungry then. So I can't imagine how it is for these folks right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're telling me, oh, well, I've got a bag of beans, a half a bag of beans, and I'm rationing that out. I'll just eat a handful of that. And then I've got two soups left and I'll just break those in half. And I'm like, how is this a thing in one of the wealthiest states in the nation that we treat human beings like this? And not just people incarcerated, we treat unhoused people and less fortunate people with this kind of attitude of, do you deserve to eat? Like, and Marcy, I always just reflect on, how dare society look at us and say, like you did that really fantastic interview with ABC 13. And they just didn't get it. They didn't quite get the point. And you and Jeffrey, they immediately said what your offenses were, which you do that, and Jeffrey does that too. But it wasn't relevant to the story, right? Because there's still this societal thing of, you know, we're always to be questioned because of our past, and we're always less deserving, and we, and it's like, but wait a minute, society as a whole is starving people and unhousing people and treating people with less than human consistently all the time. Like, we look through the food, it's happening over and over. You look through the youth system, a decade of scandals and abuse. I made 2 mistakes, and they were hard, terrible mistakes. But guess what? When I was remorseful and took accountability for it, I showed change. Like, I turned away. That's what repentance is. You see that in your life. But with the state, there is no turning away. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We won't happen. It won't happen. It won't happen. And it's just a cycle of it continuing to happen over and over and over. So how dare society point at us and our mistakes when it won't hold itself accountable for
Exactly. That's
starving
exactly
people?
right. That's exactly right. And which, yeah, I mean, you're right. We live in a state where our governor makes social media posts bragging about our wealth in our state, and the people that are literally under our state's direct care are going to bed hungry tonight.
Yeah. And the thing that makes people sleep at ease at night is, well, they did something to be there. Okay, but it makes me sad. It makes me sad because we're supposed to be a state and a nation of Christian values, quite frankly. I'll just put it out there. They're spiritual values. But when it comes to actually living those out, I don't know what Jesus any of them know or talk about, or what gospels they're reading, because he wouldn't be welcome in the door. He would be considered a socialist and a radical. I'm fixing to get real mad, so I'm going to back
Yeah,
off a
I
little
know.
bit.
I was thinking, okay, I better jump in here because we only have a few minutes left. And that feels like a
God,
whole nother show, and maybe
yeah,
another show on a different platform even. No,
right.
you're right. It's I'm out to dinner. I'm so first, I do want to say that we did have some good things happen this week in with our Lioness Justice Impacted Women's Alliance. So we can cover that just very quickly. We had um, a Recovery in the Park rally that we were a part of, and we made so many incredible connections in Dallas. And so definitely just shout out to those warriors that were fighting that heat, because it was a crowd. Man, it was a party, frankly, Tunch. So that was incredible. So that evening, I go from that, and my spirits really, like, I'm just feeling great. Yes, I had been out in the sun. Yes, all this, but I had just met so many incredible people, and people were coming up to us and they're just like, "Wow, I can't believe y'all are out here doing this." It's a group of women that went to prison, and what y'all are giving back to the community, like, just such a positive response. And then from there, I go home quickly, quickly shower and change, and I go out and I'm listening to my dad and brother play music, which is my absolutely favorite free time activity, and I don't get to do it enough. It's something that I dreamed about in prison. It's something, it's one of those activities that when you were in prison, you laid down and pictured in your mind. So I mean, I tear up every time I go. I go as often as I can, and here I am 2.5 years later, and I still tear up. So it's one of those, and I'm with my mom is there, my grandmother, my aunt, and my uncle, and then my dad and brother on stage, and I have this text message, and it's a family member of her son is incarcerated, and she sends me a video that he made her, and the food that it showed on this video, Tunch, it pulled my soul out of my up through my neck and out of my mouth, frankly, is what I felt like. It took my breath away. My face immediately changed. My mom noticed. She thought something was wrong with one of the kids. You know, that was her first reaction. And I just showed her the picture, you know, and I just can't believe that, just like you're saying, these people that you and I were incarcerated with, some of the best people we have ever met, either one of us, some of the most kind-hearted, loving, compassionate trauma victims, mentally ill, addicted to substances people that grew up in a way that some of us cannot even imagine, that this is how we're treating them. And then we're expecting them to come out on the other side and be okay. We're expecting them to come home after we have starved them and cooked them in a cell. We expect them to come home and accolade to our society and be okay. And it just doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. It you know, I tell people all the time. I mean, how am I supposed to come back out here and want to be a part of the community, to feel like a part of the community, when I know that you let me starve and cook almost to death, some of them to death? Well, and this is to show me and to scare me and to punish me enough that I will be a good girl. I mean, if that's the condition, if that's the society that you're asking me to join, well, screw you. No. If, you know, and I've said that too, when people kind of paint God in that light. Well, if that's the way God is, then I'm not interested, because I don't believe in, it didn't work in my own life when I treated people that way, with anger and violence and demands and trying to power and control folks. I mean, it doesn't work. So,
and it's proven not to work. It's proven. There's definitely data in countries that have much nicer accommodations in their prisons, if you want to call them accommodations. I should call them conditions, living conditions, and they have less recidivism rates, severely, I mean, dramatically less recidivism rates. And that's something that I get a lot. Hey, well, you ought to go to prison in Mexico, which we're not that far from those conditions. FYI, they are worse there, but not by much. So don't think, don't think that we're that much better. And if that worries you, well, it should, but the fact of the matter is, the countries that have worse conditions have higher recidivism rate. And our country leads every democratic nation in recidivism. What we're doing is not working, so we need to try some other things, right? Treating people like animals, that's not working them.
When you,
right.
When you have the rate of incarceration for women increased by 500% since 1983, there's a problem here. And it's systematic, right? Like, because you can't fix the criminal justice. In order to fix the criminal justice system, you have to fix the education system. You have to change the way that you do your health system. Like, all of it has to work together. And if you don't fix the things that are broken in all of those systems, then you can't fix the individual systems. It's like a web. And we just have a really hard time, like working on the preventative things. Let's just keep pushing things down the road to deal with. And this is the outcome.
Band-aids,
Yes.
band-aiding things, reactions to things instead of looking ahead and creating a plan. That no preventative measures are really being taken. It's all reactionary, just like this lockdown. This lockdown is reactionary. We know that there has been an influx of drugs. Oh, the cloud's going.
The cloud is
cloud
just pulling itself down.
going. So if you're listening to us, I know you heard that. And that is this beautiful cottony neon rainbow lit cloud that my daughter hung up. And I want you to know she told me it was not easy. So I feel for her that it's falling down. I'm going to work on it before I leave.
I know you will.
Yeah.
Well, Marcy, we have 5 minutes left and we still have an announcement to make.
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. So for Linus, Justice Impacted Women's Alliance, and that is the organization. Jennifer Toon is the project director. I'm the community outreach coordinator. There's our website there at the bottom. We had a raffle for a brand new pair of AirPods Pro 2nd generation. Tunchi is doing the drawing. Everybody that donated during this time period got to be in the drawing. And first, let me just say we appreciate all of your support. We could not do this without you. We are a 100% volunteer organization, and we are formerly incarcerated women getting things done. And so we could not do it without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Go, Tunchi,
Okay, here
go.
It's in my glass, my Star Wars glass here. It's Darth Vader. I find your lack of faith disturbing. Okay, here we go. All right, I'm not looking. And it's James. James Bell.
Oh!
Yes.
James Bell. James, I know James Bell from our social media.
Yes.
He has a loved one that is on a woman's unit.
Yes,
And so thank you, James. And so if you're not watching, James, we're going to email you.
Right.
But you should be watching, sir. This is going to play tomorrow night live, but I will be watching live. I will be in the comment section during that time. Tunchi's going to be at Angela Davis.
Yes, very excited.
Yeah. And then next week we will be together, all of us again. And we will be live talking about prison slang. And what we need for you to do is to come up with some slang.
Oh, yeah.
Ladies that we were locked up with, we know you know some. Gentlemen, we know you know some that we didn't ever even think about saying in there. Come with your prison slang and be ready to share it with us. We cannot wait. So we are
slang and nicknames. Slang and nicknames.
Oh, yes. Nicknames. Tunche.
I can't wait to hear what Marcy's nickname was that nobody knows. Somebody told me. Mm-hmm.
Somebody told you.
Dirty. It's dirty. I'm going to tell everybody.
It's dirty. Well, we might not be live next week. You know what? And I'm going to tell you something. We had my girlfriend on the show not very long ago, and she came for me. And if you start coming for me, y'all are going to have problems. Tunch, I love you. Have a good night. Until next time.
Bye, everybody.
Thank y'all for hanging out with us on the Recyard Women's Prison Podcast with Marcy Marie and Tunchi. Make sure and subscribe to our channels so you'll never miss a rec night.
Is it